Have you ever received mail that made your blood run cold? That's exactly what happened to me on what started as an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was sorting through the usual stack of bills and advertisements when I spotted an envelope that would turn my peaceful life upside down. The bold red letters across the top screamed, "Delinquent Horf, Final Notice." My first reaction was to chuckle. You see, I've spent my entire adult life deliberately avoiding HOAs. I've heard too many horror stories from friends and neighbors about petty rules, constant fines, and power-hungry board members. That's why I chose to live on my grandfather's old property, 5 beautiful acres outside city limits. Far from any neighborhood association drama, but this wasn't a joke. The letter demanded nearly $2,300 in past due fees for a property they claimed. I owned inside Willow Creek Estates, a gated community about 2 miles from my home. I read the letter 3 times, certain there had to be some mistake. They listed a specific lot number and address, Lot 47, 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. The problem? I'd never set foot on that property, let alone owned it. My house sits on land that's been in my family for over 40 years, long before Willow Creek was even a gleam in some developer's eye. My hands actually shook a little as I reached for the phone. Maybe this was some elaborate scam, but the letterhead looked official, complete with an embossed seal and everything. A woman answered on the second ring. Willow Creek HOA. This is Karen speaking. Hi, Karen. I'm calling about a letter I received regarding HOA fees. I think there's been a serious mistake. Let me stop you right there. Shh, she interrupted, her voice sharp as a razor. Are you calling about Lot 47? Well, yes, but you see, sir, our records clearly show you as the property owner. If you've been ignoring your financial obligations for the past 2 years, that's frankly not our problem. The dismissive tone in her voice caught me completely off guard. Ma'am, I need you to understand I don't live in Willow Creek. I've never owned property there. I live on Pine Hollow Road, and she actually laughed. Not a friendly laugh, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. Oh, please. Do you have any idea how often we hear that story? Everyone claims they don't owe when they get caught. Caught? Caught doing what? I'm telling you the truth. Look, Mr. Dot, I heard papers rustling. The records don't lie. You have 30 days to pay, or we'll be forced to take legal action. Have a good day. The line went dead. I sat there staring at the phone, my heart pounding. Was this really happening? Could an HOA just randomly assign debt to someone and demand payment? That evening, I did what my grandfather had taught me to do whenever there was a property question. I pulled out the county records. Grandpa always said, "Son, land records don't lie." But people sure do. I spent an hour on the county website searching every database I could find. The results were crystal clear. I owned nothing in Willow Creek Estates. Lot 47 belonged to someone named Eric Dawson, a complete stranger, armed with this proof. I felt confident I could clear this up quickly. After all, we live in a world where information is easily verifiable. Surely, once I showed them the official records, this nightmare would end. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. I had no idea that some people are willing to ignore facts when money is involved, or how far they'd go to collect what they believed they were owed. I've always believed that most problems can be solved with patience and clear communication. So I took the high road. I drafted a professional letter explaining the situation, attached certified copies of the county property records, and sent it both by mail and email to the HOA office. For a week, I felt good about how I'd handled things. I'd been thorough, polite, and provided irrefutable proof. Surely that would be the end of it. Then the second letter arrived. This one made the first look friendly by comparison. The header read "Final Demand" in letters so bold they seemed to jump off the page. But what really made my stomach drop was the threat buried in the middle of the document. Failure to remit payment will result in a lien being placed against your primary residence. My primary residence. The home my grandfather built with his own hands. The land where I had played as a child, where I'd learned to work with my hands, where I planned to grow old. The anger that surged through me was unlike anything I'd felt in years. They weren't just making a mistake anymore. They were threatening to put my family's legacy at risk. A lien could destroy my credit, affect my ability to refinance, even impact my children's inheritance. I called Karen again, but this time I hit record on my phone. Growing up on a farm teaches you to document everything, and I had a feeling I'd need evidence of these conversations. Karen, this is about Lot 47 again. Did you receive the property records I sent? They clearly show, "Oh, it's you again," she said with obvious irritation. I told you already. Our records show you as the owner. We don't have time for games. My voice stayed steady, but inside I was seething. Karen, I'm going to say this one more time, very clearly. I am not the owner of Lot 47. I have never been the owner. I sent you official county documents proving this. If you continue to threaten my property based on false information, I will have no choice but to take legal action. There was a pause. Then she said something that still makes my blood boil. Good luck with that. Our legal team doesn't lose. We know how to handle troublemakers like you. Click. She'd hung up on me again. I sat there for a long moment. The phone still in my hand, processing what had just happened. They knew they were wrong. The evidence was sitting right there in their office. But they were going to keep pushing anyway, apparently betting that I'd cave under pressure rather than fight back. 7 days later, I was working in my garden when a stranger walked up my driveway. He was wearing an ill-fitting suit and carrying a manila envelope. "You've been served," he said, handing me the papers before walking away without another word. My hands were still dirty from the soil as I opened the envelope. Inside was a lawsuit, the Willow Creek. HOA was taking me to court for unpaid dues and associated fees totaling over $3,000. That night, I spread all the documents across my kitchen table, the same table where my grandfather used to plant his crops, where my father had done his homework, where I'd helped my own kids with their school projects. 3 generations of my family had made important decisions at this table, but none quite like this. I thought about my grandfather, who'd passed away 5 years earlier. He'd lived through the Depression, served in World War II, and built this property from nothing. He'd taught me that sometimes life throws curveballs, but you never, ever back down from bullies. I picked up the phone and called the lawyer he'd recommended years ago, Jim Patterson, a man who specialized in property disputes and had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. "Jim, I need help. Someone's trying to steal my grandfather's land, and I'm not going to let that happen." The morning of the court hearing, I'll admit I was nervous. Not because I was wrong, the facts were on my side, but because I was facing what felt like an army. The Willow Creek HOA board arrived in force. Karen, the president, a stern-faced man named Richard, 2 other board members, and not one but 2 lawyers in expensive suits. They took up an entire row in the courtroom, whispering among themselves and shooting confident looks in my direction. I sat with Jim Patterson, my grandfather's lawyer who'd become like family over the years. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of calm presence that comes from decades of fighting the good fight. "Remember," he whispered to me, "truth has a way of shining through all the noise." When our case was called, the HOA's lead attorney, a young hotshot who looked like he'd stepped out of a law school recruitment brochure, immediately went on the attack. "Your Honor," he began with theatrical flair, "the defendant has willfully ignored his financial obligations to the Willow Creek HOA for over 2 years. Despite multiple notices and attempts at resolution, he has refused to pay legitimate dues totaling $3,247. The HOA had no choice but to seek legal remedy. He painted me as some kind of deadbeat, someone who was trying to cheat hard-working homeowners out of money needed for community maintenance and services. If I hadn't known better, even I might have believed I was guilty." Then Jim stood up. There's something beautiful about watching a master craftsman at work. That's exactly what happened next. Jim didn't raise his voice, didn't use fancy legal jargon, didn't try to dazzle anyone with theatrics. He simply walked to the judge's bench and placed a manila folder in front of him. "Your Honor," Jim said in his measured, grandfatherly tone, "my client does not now, nor has he ever, owned any property within the Willow Creek HOA. These are the official county deed records. certified by the clerk's office yesterday morning. The courtroom was dead silent as the judge opened the folder and began reading. I watched his expression change from mild interest to confusion to what looked like irritation, after what felt like an eternity. The judge looked up at the HOA's lawyers, counselors. I'm looking at clear documentation that the defendant has never owned Lot 47. The property belongs to an Eric Dawson. Do you have any evidence? Any evidence at all, connecting your client to this property? The young lawyer's confidence evaporated instantly. He shuffled through his papers, whispered frantically with his colleague, then turned to Karen and the board members. More whispered conversations, more paper shuffling. Finally, he stood back up. Your Honor, It appears there may have been an administrative error. Our records showed ... administrative error. The judge's voice had an edge to it now. You've brought this man into my courtroom, demanded thousands of dollars, and threatened his property based on an administrative error? Karen actually stood up from the gallery. Your Honor, if I may, ma'am, please sit down. You are not authorized to speak in my courtroom. The judge turned back to the lawyers. This case is dismissed. Immediately. Then he looked directly at me. Sir, I apologize for the waste of your time and the stress this has clearly caused you. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But Jim wasn't finished. Your Honor, he said. Still standing, given the harassment my client has endured, the threats made against his property, and the legal costs he's incurred defending himself against these baseless accusations. We will be filing a countersuit for damages. The judge nodded approvingly. That sounds entirely appropriate, Counselor. I turned to look at the HOA board. Karen's face had gone completely white. The confident president was staring at his shoes. Their expensive lawyers were packing up their briefcases as quickly as possible. Outside the courthouse, Karen approached me one last time. Her arrogant demeanor was completely gone, replaced by what looked like panic. Look, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Maybe we can work something out privately. Avoid any more unpleasantness. I looked at this woman who had dismissed me, threatened me, and tried to steal my family's land. Jim put a gentle hand on my shoulder. Ma'am, I said calmly, you had your chance to do the right thing. Multiple chances, actually. You chose to fight instead. Well, congratulations, you got the fight you wanted. The countersuit was everything I'd hoped it would be, and more. Over the following months, Jim systematically dismantled the HOA's defense with the precision of a surgeon. He presented evidence of every threatening letter, every dismissive phone call, and yes, even the recording of Karen's arrogant comment about their lawyers not losing. He documented the stress, anxiety their harassment had caused, the time I'd lost from work dealing with their accusations, and the damage to my reputation in the community, but perhaps most damning was what came out during the discovery process. It turned out this wasn't an isolated incident. The HOA had been using aggressive tactics against other property owners for years, often collecting money from people who were too scared or confused to fight back. One elderly resident had paid over $1,000 in bogus fines rather than face a lawsuit. A young single mother had been assessed penalties for violations that occurred before she even moved into the neighborhood. The pattern was clear and disturbing. The HOA's lawyers tried desperately to settle out of court, but Jim and I decided to push forward. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about holding bullies accountable for their actions. When the final judgment came down, I'll admit I was stunned by the amount. The court awarded me $127,000 in damages, plus all attorney fees. It was more than 50 times what they'd originally tried to collect from me. The impact on Willow Creek was immediate and dramatic. When homeowners learned that their HOA fees were being raised to pay for the settlement, they demanded answers. How had their board been so reckless with association funds? Why had they pursued a case without doing basic fact-checking? Karen resigned within a week of the judgment. The president and another board member were voted out in an emergency election. The entire leadership structure that had enabled this harassment was swept away by angry homeowners who realized their own property values were at risk from the association's reckless behavior. As for me, I used the settlement money to do something my grandfather would have loved. I restored his old barn, the one where he'd taught me to work with wood and metal. I upgraded all the fencing around our property, installed a beautiful new gate, and even added a workshop where I could continue the crafts he'd passed down to me. Every morning now, when I sit on my porch with my coffee, I can see the Willow Creek entrance about 2 miles down the road. Sometimes I spot residents driving past, and I wonder if they know the story of how their former board tried to steal an old farmer's land and ended up paying for their arrogance, my grandfather used to say. Son, bullies count on good people being too polite to fight back, but sometimes the most polite thing you can do is teach them a lesson they won't forget. He was right, as usual. The HOA thought they could intimidate me into paying money I didn't owe for land I'd never owned. Instead, they learned that some fights aren't worth picking, especially when you're in the wrong. The best part? Every month, when those Willow Creek homeowners pay their increased dues to cover my settlement, they're reminded that actions have consequences. And maybe, just maybe, the next board will think twice before they try to bully someone who's just trying to live quietly. On their family's land, sometimes the little guy does win, and sometimes the best revenge really is just standing up for what's right.